Thanks, Gabriel. 5 out of 10. Hopefully, we can get that up to a 7 or an 8 by the end of this session. Dave Darmish, how's your day out of 10?
I would say mine's a 9 so far.
Wow, that's quite good. That's quite a high number.
It is a high number.
Mine's an 8. It'll be 10 by the time we finish this.
Come on. We love to see it. We love to see it. We love to see it. Right. I think we're good to start. We've got a 7 there. We've got a 9 there. We've got a 5. Thank you everyone for joining us for another Purposeful Weekend session. I am very happy and excited to be joined today by Dave and Dharmesh. They both run a podcast together, and I found out about Dharmesh through Dave. I won't butcher their CVs, but I'll give them both the floor to tell you a bit about what they do right now. And the first question that will go with like what you do right now is, how did it feel when you got your first 6-figure client?
So Dom, do you want to go first?
Dharmesh Mystery. I'm a geek and I love technology. But what I really love about technology is when it improves people's lives, right? When it makes something better for another human being. I'm not really into the bits and bytes and how clever technology can be for the sake of tech. I really like it seeing, how it's used to improve people's lives. And actually, the first 6-figure project that I was involved with was back in '97, just before I met Dave, to be fair. And it was a co-op bank. And, it was a bank that was very focused on multi-channel experiences and, was wanting to go onto the internet. And at that point in the UK, none of the internet banks had gone live. During the project, Nationwide and RBS went live just before us, and then we went live shortly afterwards. But, when we were pitching for this, you've got to imagine this was a startup with about half a dozen people, right, in a tin pot outfit in Goring, lovely part of the world, but nobody imagined the tech company would be there, right? And, we had some very good salespeople, the two founders, very good salespeople. And myself, who had never sold anything really, because I'd worked in banks before, right? And we put forward a very compelling case for internet banking, that we could do this based on their experience from having worked with the likes of Steve Jobs, selling an e-commerce platform that they were selling for Next. And what happened was that we actually lost the bid in the end because they said that they weren't comfortable with our level of experience in handling security. And so we went back to the drawing board and we said, well, who else, knows really about security? And when I found a company in Germany that had brought together a solution for 128-bit SSL. So at the time, the browser only had 32-bit SSL, very weak security. So we repitched the solution and we said, look, this solution is way more secure than anything else in the market. And, that's why we should be allowed back in the pitch. And essentially, because of that, it was a game changer and we won the bid, and really, what we hadn't worked out in the first pitch was what was the real buying criteria here. We thought it was just the delivery of internet banking. But actually, they wanted internet banking, but they wanted really secure internet banking, right? And we were lucky enough to be able to kind of work that out in the process and close that deal.
Love that. That's something that I think they call it buyer's remorse sometimes, when the buyer doesn't get what they want or there's something that they really need. And then there's obviously the whole process of like actually identifying whether there's a chemistry when you're actually trying to win the sale. So I think we can definitely unpack a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you can ask the question like, what's the 3 most important things that you want, from this project, and they'll tell you what they've got on their, RFP. But it takes a lot more of questioning and understanding the people, right? Because the issue of security wasn't necessarily driven by the bank. It's driven by the guy who is running the project, his fear for his losing his job if there was a security breach, right? So it wasn't in the RFP list, right? And that's really, I think, quite key to a lot of these bigger deals, is that, you know, really getting to what's going to change, you know, this person's mind, or who's making the decision, etc. Yeah.
So I mean, because I met Dharmesh around the time that this was happening, and I think, you know, people forget that people buy off other people.
Yeah.
And what Dharmesh managed to do, and I think, you know, it was really obvious, is he managed to get the team very comfortable around this very complex, this very complex sort of product. And, you know, you were very credible because you'd come from the sort of industry. You were able to talk to them in a language that they kind of understood. So I think, you know, you were sort of instrumental in kind of making sure that person who was worried about losing their job if the security all went wrong, that they were made to feel comfortable by the whole thing. And actually, you know, when I look back on that, you took responsibility for ensuring everything in terms of making sure that was then delivered. So, you know, that client had you as the person they could turn to really, every time they had a worry or concern, you were there to kind of make sure that they understood that you were listening and you had a kind of response to it. So it's kind of, you know, when people are spending a lot of money, they need to feel very comfortable with the people that they're dealing with. And as I say, you know, it's just never forget that people buy off other people, and that's kind of the critical thing.
Yeah,
it's very kind. Yeah, good point, Dave. And that's very kind you to say that. So,
and then yourself, Dave. Tell us a bit about.
Well, so yeah, I mean,
I your first six-figure client as well.
So I joined this company. I joined Dharmesh, and I'd come from Yellow Pages. So I'd come from so Yellow Pages, which what is called Yell now, or it was very corporate. At that stage, it was part of BT. And then I suddenly joined the startup, and then they were off, you know, selling to banks and big insurance companies. And I think in our first 3 years of that business, we managed to grow turnover from nothing to 14 million pounds. So I was like, oh, this is the way it all works the whole time, you know.
Hold on, let's celebrate that. That's not no small feat, fellas. That's not no.
No. As it turns out, it's quite a big feat. So I was like, well, this is the way of the world in terms of, you know, and actually what was kind of really interesting, because Dharmesh and I, we had salespeople around us, but what was, I think you'll agree, Dharm, that we were the most effective salespeople that business had, because we were really passionate about what we were doing. We were the subject matter experts. So Dharmesh was the geek, and I like to say the freak, which was the design and the UX person. We were a really good team, and we'd go in jointly to these opportunities, and we, you know, make sure. I think people just could feel the chemistry between us, but also they understood that we knew what we were talking about. So I think that was really interesting. And then sort of that business, through, you know, sort of no fault of our own, then eventually disappeared, and I set up my own agency. And I then realized actually to go from nothing to 14 million was in that short period, it was extraordinary. And actually it took me a long time to grow my business to that scale again. But our first six-figure client in that business was a bank. And, you know, actually we didn't get that by pitching a six-figure bit of work to begin with. We pitched a very small bit of work. We got our foot in the door, and then we looked at the opportunity in that organization, and we built a pipeline in that organization, and that turned into 6 and actually then on to 7 figures. So, you know, sometimes when you're sort of thinking about building a kind of that sort of 6-figure client and that 6-figure piece of work, it doesn't come straight away. You know, it very rarely comes straight away. You have to sort of, I think, open doors be prepared to kind of do some sort of smaller pieces of work, and then think about how you can kind of get into that opportunity, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It's definitely something that kind of speaks to kind of like sustainable businesses long term, especially in the service world, around retention. I think people get so excited to close the first deal that they often forget that it's all good getting all these new biz wins, but the real business and the real one that sustains long time is actually the one that doesn't have that much churn and actually has people coming back.
So BJ, that's such a good point. And I think if the business that Dharmesh and I met at, it grew too quickly. So, you know, there was a stage where we were literally in stations trying to attract people to come and work for us. We were talking to strangers, you know, because we couldn't get people in the door fast enough. So you're right, it's exactly right. It wasn't sustainable to kind of do that. And actually, you know, if you take your time over this stuff, you can build your business around it. And, you know, I always think if you think about a kind of client as a long-term partner or long-term opportunity, then you can really look to build your team around them. So your point is exactly spot on, and we've kind of lived that.
Yeah, I love that. Now, something that has kind of come out of both of your opening talks have kind of, it's been, I felt a lot around product and understanding exactly the value you're offering these people. And then the second thing was all around relationships. I think those are two things that kind of resonated with me. I wanted to kind of like understand in both your kind of experience and your thoughts, if you're starting again. I know, Dave, you've obviously got a new company you've started recently in NMD, and I know Dharmesh is still running Ask Homie right now, but for the founder who literally has no big sales experience, they've got something that's awesome that they know the world, they want the world to see. How should they be thinking about their sales strategy? Because I think the foundation, before even having a conversation about 6 figures or 7 figures, it's got to be strategy for me. I don't know if something even before that, but if let's just say that product is there and they want to test it. Now there's a getting to market point. What frameworks, what thought processes, what questions should a founder be asking when pulling together their first or their second or more revised sales strategy for 2022?
Do you want to take that, Dom?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's got to be that I think one of the challenges for a startup, right, is that you've got, you know, sales to think about, and then you've also got you're naturally, especially in the tech world, right, you're naturally thinking about funding and what the funders would require. They require revenue and growth, you know, and these guys require a solution to a problem. So when you're thinking about the funding side of it, you kind of want to build a picture that there's a massive ocean of opportunity that you can address. Your skill set or your services or your product can address a huge ocean of opportunity. The problem with that is that, you know, it's too generic, and you'll go to a client and you can say, I can do anything. It's almost like saying I can do anything for you, right? Whereas if you pick a very, very specific problem and you identify a problem or an opportunity that applies to everybody, but it's very specific, then I think that helps you build a pipeline, because it helps you to filter the people that you're going to speak to. So for example, let's say it was anti-money laundering. You know, you're only going to speak to compliance. You don't have to work out who in an organization of 100,000 employees to speak to. It's the AML, you know, chief of AML, right? Secondly, you know, you're going to know as much about the problem as possible before you go in. If it's generic, you've got to know about lots of little things, and you'll be too much of a generalist. If you can be a specialist on the problem, they're all ears, right? So you've got their attention, right? And thirdly, if you pitch exactly the same thing, but make little adjustments from learning from each one of those things, your fourth or fifth one will be perfect, and you'll be winning much more on a regular basis. So, you know, pick something very specific, you know, narrow down the audience you're going to kind of have to address, and then, you know, go and get as many pitches as possible. Yeah, that's my view.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of practice as well. I don't expect to get your pitch right in the first place. So, you know, one of the things I'm loving about my new startup, which is another little agency, is you know, I pitch to people and I get sort of people going, well, what the hell are you talking about? You know, I get immediate feedback. So I've got a product, I can see the opportunity. But then, you know, I sort of found through the process of kind of pitching that people kind of either, you know, they've got questions or they might not understand it. And I use that to kind of refine the pitch and refine the proposition, because just because you think it's brilliant doesn't mean that the rest of the world will think it's brilliant or understand it. So, you know, I think this whole thing of don't be frightened to practice, you know, start with your family, you know, get your, so, you know, if you sort of pitch and you feel embarrassed about what you're pitching, sort of wonder why you feel embarrassed, you know, what it's, or, you know, if you pitch to your family and they say, well, look, you know, I didn't quite understand this, just sort of really think about what it is. So don't be frightened to change your sales deck as kind of time goes on. So I think that evolution is really, really important.
That is something that you're very good at, Dave, is that, you know, you're very open to kind of critique and refining the thing and actually really listening, you know, to the customer and what they're actually saying. Even the words might be saying one thing, but you're working out what they really meaning. And that's, you know, absolutely key, I think.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. I think that's definitely pretty practical. How do you guys both practice? So Dave, you mentioned in front of family, but like the strategy is now down now, you know, you've made a great point about maybe productizing yourself a bit so that you're not selling loads of different things and being generic, but actually, you know, we're just selling the same thing. I think Dharmesh made the same point as well. But okay, next step, practice. I see so many rookie mistakes, you know, not walking into your meeting without your pamphlet or your follow-up pamphlet for the person. They call it decks, they call it PowerPoint, different industries, different things, but it's the same thing. What does practice look like for you guys?
Yeah, so I think practice then means getting in front of people. So you need to create a pipeline, and, you know, I mean, I'm not sure, we won't go into the kind of details of that, but, you know, basically find people who you can go and pitch to. And, you know, you're not going to, I mean, you might do, but it's very rare that you're going to connect with the first few people that you meet. So, you know, expect to kind of go through a process of talking to lots and lots of people. So, you know, I think it's just, I think sales is people forget, is a kind of numbers game. So, you know, you need to think about like having a broad kind of pool of people or companies that you pitch to in the first place. And then out of that broad pool, you'll have a few who kind of really say, yeah, let's take it to the next meeting or whatever. And then you're kind of narrowing down the whole time, and you basically need to manage that whole process of narrowing down. As you're narrowing down to sort of through sort of, I guess, a range of meetings, you're basically constantly checking what you're selling, and, you know, what, you know, going back to Dharmesh's point about what people are really interested in, what you're buying, and sort of shaping your story around that for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, I mean, you know, in enterprise software, you know, if it's an established playing field, like let's say, for example, CRM, right? There's no point in trying to say, you know, let's do a discovery call to work out if you understand CRM, so that, you know, we can show you, you understand whether we can help you, you know, implement a better, you know, relationship management strategy using our software, right? But certainly in kind of newer issues or opportunities, you need some kind of level of meeting where you kind of discovering more about what the client actually needs. So, you know, for example, you know, with Ask Homey, we'll say, you know, our first call is, you know, can we book 15 minutes to see if you know, reducing your costs on property handovers, if that's important to you, can we see whether we can, you know, shave 25 to 50% off your cost in doing that, right? And very quickly you'll know A, whether most people worry about that cost, and B, you'll get that 15 minutes, because if it's important, they'll want to spend 15 minutes on it, right? And at that point, you're not actually pitching to them a solution. You're just saying, well, look, tell me about the process. How does it go? Where do you find the pain points? How much are you spending on this? Yeah, I think we can help you. Can I book another call now to show you how we can help you, right? So now you've got empathy with the client, because they've told you about their problem, and now you're saying, I'm going to try and help you fix it.
Yeah, love that. It's very important. We're getting a few questions in from the audience, so I want to get people engaged a bit before I go back to my set of questions I prepared for you guys. I think we will start with Kelly's question. How long should your pitch last for? I suppose it's almost like how long's a piece of string. Can you guys give some examples of?
Well, so I for me, I think you should be aiming to kind of get as much what you want to say to people over in about 10 to 15 minutes. Now, maybe that the conversation and the presentation goes longer, but that is kind of, you need to be distilling things down into bite-sized chunks, because people get bored, they start looking out the windows. So you've probably got 10 or 15 minutes to kind of connect with people, would be my view. And I think it's again, it's really like often in pitches. So, again, I'm from a sort of much more services than a product point of view. What you're trying to do, to Dharmesh's point around empathy, is very quickly listen to what the people are saying to you. So, pitch is half about delivering your message and half about listening to what people are saying. So, if it turns into a 40, 50, 60-minute kind of monologue from you, then everyone's just going to go, what's this all about?
Yeah, I mean, Dave makes a really good point. If whether you've done it in the meeting or whether you've done it in a discovery call up front, once you understand their problem, your pitch should all be focused on what the problems that they've told you about, right? And you say, right, and you said blah blah blah, and this is how this resolves that, or this is why we save you so much time or so much money based on the problem that you're having over here, right? So as long as you're relating to their absolute need, I mean, typically we would have a 5 to 15-minute discovery call, and then typically our pitch would be half an hour. But in that half an hour, obviously you've got some intros, you've got a conclusion, you've got a demo as well, right? So it's quite it's a little bit longer than maybe Dave's approach, but from a product perspective, we have to sneak in a demo there as well.
Very important. Very, very, very important. Next question I've got in here from Ryan. What was the biggest factor for moving from 5 to 6 figure size deals?
So I think there's a few things in there. I mean, for me, there's confidence. So, believing that you're worth that money or your product is worth that money is a massive thing. So, when I started my previous agency, I didn't do enough work in understanding what competitors were charging. So I basically plucked a figure out of the air, and it sort of felt like what I think was kind of right. And then, a few years into it, I discovered we were really cheap. And I was like, oh. So, which was quite a good position to be. But then I had to go like, we're going to raise our rates. And I had to go back to clients and saying, we're raising our rates. So I then had to justify that process. Now, if I'd done my homework a bit earlier on, I would have seen that actually we were selling ourselves a bit cheap to begin with. So, I think it's listen to or try and understand what sort of companies like you, what their charging structure is. And, it's always amazing to me, like what companies do charge for specific things. But then use that to kind of fuel your confidence to kind of go from 5 to 6 figures. And I think, that when you do get those larger deals, I mean, it's such an amazing feeling. So, focus on that kind of that adrenaline rush as well. I mean, it's a really nice feeling. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, exactly the same thing. I'd say, you've got to understand the opportunity, right? And is the opportunity worth 6 figures in the first place? And if it is, then that's great. You can go ahead and charge it. It's not about the size of company that you are, but it's about how easily that customer can find other people to do it for them cheaper, right? And if they can't, then why are you charging cheaper, right? You go straight in at a 6 figure if that's what it's worth, and it's hard to get that product or that service. Yeah. And that's why you should charge for it. I mean, in the early days of the internet, I think the average mandate rates were like, $450 for an IT consultant, and we were charging $1,000 a day for a graduate, right?
Wow.
Because you couldn't get people with experience of the internet, so you could get away with it. Post the dot-com boom, rates dropped back down towards six, $750, because in the 5-year window that we were operating in, lots of people came to market, people got up to date with the skills, and then it wasn't so scarce to get those skills anymore, right? So it's about knowing the market, and especially from a product perspective, sometimes that can be really difficult to see what competitors are charging, etc. But the best thing to do is, in your practice call, also ask them, how much is this problem worth to you to get solved? What would you pay for it?
Big question.
And choosing small customers that if you lose them, doesn't really matter, then that's the best way to do it.
So that's a really good point. But it's also going from 5 to 6 figure clients or opportunities is often it's determined by the size of the people you're pitching to. So I'm a believer that the size of the business you're hunting for will then reflect in the size of the business you become. So if you're targeting like the hairdresser down the road, you're never going to be a 6-figure business. Whereas if you target a FTSE 100 company, then definitely you kind of are likely to, and you kind of win work, then you're likely to be a bigger business. So have a think about like who you're going after as well.
Yeah.
That's the kind of big thing.
So yeah, I definitely will probably even add to that with my own businesses. Having a couple of different buckets in place and understanding, right, what are quick wins, because obviously a business runs on cash flow, and then who are like our dream clients, and then working through it. But understanding that not all money is good money. So sometimes even turning away and being like, hey, don't have to burn the bridge, but this doesn't work for us right now. I think clients respect that, and they will still consider you if you're still delivering good work. I've seen those relationships where we've done the work just because we wanted to do it. And there's something that we needed to just get out of the way, rather than because the team really loved it and something we could really deliver. There's a difference. There's 2 different levels. So yeah, I hope that helps you, Mr. McGee, Ryan. Next question we've got in is, how did you each approach getting clients for your new startup? This is an age-old question. But yeah, how did you approach getting clients for your new startup? I think Dharmesh, pick up the phone. What about now, like where people are maybe not in the office? These phone lines don't always go through anymore. What's the new phone?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough cold calling people at the moment. So
I think that I got an answer: podcasts, interviews, create some sort of media that enables you to bring them and move them and get them, excited a bit.
Funny you should say that, because that's one of Dharmesh and I do run a little podcast, so we're both focused on the prop tech and fintech marketplaces.
Yeah.
And that's opened a load of doors to us. So I think it's all hard work, this stuff. In the old days, it was about kind of cold calling and building sales lists and things like that. In this day, you need to be on LinkedIn, you need to be visible, you need to create content. So both Dharmesh and I are doing a lot of writing, and that it's sort of like the more visible you are, the more people then kind of gravitate towards you, or the more legitimacy you have in terms of opening those doors. So what I do at the moment is I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and then I've got someone who helps me in terms of just follow-up meetings, but with people I've kind of connected with on LinkedIn, because just managing getting meetings is a absolute mission in itself. So people say, yeah, we'll see you, but then just actually getting to see them can take an awfully long time. So I guess it's like all this stuff though, what you want is people to say, yeah, I will meet with you, and then you're kind of in, and you can then do the rest of things from there. I think a lot of agencies, again, I don't use them, but there are intermediaries out there who will connect you with clients. So don't forget that these intermediaries exist, and so a lot of agencies actually use those intermediaries. So have a think about who's out there who can then put you in touch with potential clients as well, and then use your network as well. So it's really good to have a kind of solid network, and it's really good if people say, oh look, someone I know is looking to do X, Y, and Z, would you be interested in having a chat with them? So I think it's been very kind of socially minded, I think is the way to do things now.
I think a lot depends also in your target market, where are they spending their time, right? Certainly in the early days of the internet, nobody was on social media or the web really looking for companies, right? So our early success in that startup had to do a lot with PR. We were the company that was that put one of the banks live on the internet for the very first time. We did the world's first Java-based solution. We did the world's first insurance solution, and that got huge amounts of PR. Right.
Yeah.
And that point in time, we couldn't afford to do advertising in the broadsheets. So we went down the PR route, and we generated loads of it, right? Because that's where the customer was getting its information from, right? I did a follow-on company, and in that one, we kind of use social and the web a lot more. But again, we went back to also some traditional marketing, because these were enterprise sales. So we had people calling customers, fixing appointments, then turning up doing pitches, right? In my current gig at the moment with Ask Homey, we had to work out where property developers spend their time. Where do they source their materials? Where do they source contractors, etc., and be there, right? Most of those guys aren't on social media, right? They don't spend lots of time on their mobile phones. They're on site, with bricks and mortar stuff, right? So what else can you do, right?
Big facts. Kind of got to meet your customer wherever they are.
Yeah, definitely. For the property developers, it's down the pub, buying them pints and things. But yeah, I mean, it's really, I mean, I love your point about PR, because people really do underestimate the power of PR. And I know that's been the topic of one of the other sessions that you've run, BJ. But even now, getting someone to endorse you in an article is really powerful. So, I still think PR is a very powerful weapon in all of this stuff. So, and I mean, as you know, now if someone prints an article for you, you can tweet it, you can put it on LinkedIn, you can put it everywhere basically. And it's sort of the longevity of stuff. I mean, this is something Dharmesh taught me, is but just one piece of content you can use over and over and over again, and sweat that piece of content. And I think just getting eyeballs on this stuff is really important.
Yeah.
One other thing I'd just add is on the enterprise sales side of things, especially from a software perspective, another key thing, and this worked really well in my previous company, which sold a software platform for building web and mobile applications. We got onto where we helped define a space with Gartner, the analysts, that was about mobile application development. And then it became kind of user experience platforms. And we kind of broadened out the platform with for them. We helped them to shape it, define it. We wrote some thought leadership with them, right? And so then they started to publicize it. And as soon as they, first came to market with the paper, they said, well, look, you're too small a company to go in a magic quadrant because there's a sales criteria associated to it, but we'll put you in the cool vendor kind of category. And suddenly, you know, we've got loads of people interested, like, why are you a cool vendor, right? And then as our sales grew, we got into the magic quadrant. And the advantage of getting into the magic quadrant is that if you're a largish organization, somebody's going to ask you, why did you choose this vendor? And if you can say, well, we did our homework, but we also checked with Gartner who the main vendors were. And we picked one of the top vendors in this space. And it was, you know, Darm's company there, blah, blah, blah. They're in the top right-hand quadrant, right? So, you know, don't underestimate the power of, you know, what you can do with analysts as well. I think that's a really useful avenue, especially on kind of enterprise software sales.
Love that. How does someone go about establishing a relationship like that?
That's a topic for another day, but essentially you've got to know how Gartner operate. If you can pull the right levers, it's got nothing to do with how good your product is, actually, by the way, right? So this is a fact. None of the analysts.
Unilever, it could be anyone. It doesn't have to just be Gartner.
Yeah, it could be Data Monitor, it could be Forrester, it could be, you know, any one of Celent, it could be any one of the big analysts, right? None of them, you know, they're all evaluating software, right? None of them take the software and install it on their site and go, oh yeah, this one's great. Oh yeah, this doesn't work. None of them do that. They interview you and they ask you a load of questions and then they position you. But there's a lot more to the game than, you know, I'm letting on right now. So once you understand how to pull the levers, suddenly you'll go, it doesn't matter about the size of the company or what kind of product you've got. It's more about how you've engaged with the analyst, right? And that makes a huge difference to your positioning.
Are you there, BJ? BJ seems to have frozen.
Oh, I was right. He might have a frozen, yeah. So
No, I'm back. I'm back. East London lover. It's all good.
It was such a good answer, Dharmesh, that he's
stunned.
Stunned, yeah.
Okay, so in a process of finding a prospect, working on a sale, working on a deal, you're in a conversation. I suppose we've all probably done deals where, I think Dave mentioned it already, you're underselling yourself, or you've rushed too quickly to get the terms done just so that it's in that quarter so you can tell the investors. But a topic I wanted to discuss was how to negotiate in your terms, how to negotiate in your favor when leading sales, or just any tips, opinions, thought processes.
Well,
when I mean negotiation, like how do you approach it?
Try and stay away from procurement as long as you possibly can. So, I mean, if you can negotiate with the people that you've pitched to, like, and built the relationship with, that tends to go better, to be honest with you. As soon as they put the professionals in, like the procurement teams, it then just turns into a different ball game. So, then I would make sure you have like the right support from finance people and legal people in terms of going off and negotiating. Because basically what the procurement team do is they suck all the emotion out of the whole process and, leave you with forms to fill in. So, I was in a process for, we were pitching for some work for a really big company. It was, it was about £500,000. And basically, we were the company that the client wanted to go with, but their procurement team kept saying, well, the other people in the process, they're cheaper than you. And then they basically started whittling away what we were doing from a kind of budgetary point of view. And, it got to the point where we were like, well, we're just not going to make any money out of this. So I was like, well, if we need to make money because we need to pay people and we need to so at the end of the day, we just ended up going, look, we can't do this work because, you've absolutely procurement, you screwed us to the floor. So we ended up walking away. And I know that the company who then took on the work, they actually had real problems. They actually had massive business impact because they decided to take on the work. And, you know, I was jolly glad that we hadn't done it. So I think the point is, if you can steer away from procurement for as long as possible, that's a good thing, because then you're kind of dealing with people at that more emotional level. If you get into procurement, then bring in finance and legal people to support you.
Smart. Love that.
Yeah, I always make sure that there's a little bit of allowance on price for procurement, because that's what the procurement guy also wants is, you know, I've done my bit and I've, you know, you guys sweated everything, but I've done my bit to reduce the cost. But I think Dave is right. You can't take deals at any cost. You can invest in a deal if it has strategic, you know, outcomes for you, and it means that you won't go bust. So yeah, you can buy a deal if the name is big enough and it will help you open other doors, etc. But you've got to go in eyes wide open. You've got to know that at the end of that project, you haven't burnt enough of your cash that you can't chase any other customers after that, right?
Yeah. Very important. Obviously, if you've now done all these processes that we spoke about and the pipeline and the phone is ringing off, you know, managing relationships, managing prospects, relationship management is the next kind of 101 that I think people need to master. I fell down on this many times. I've, you know, smashed it a few times as well. But what are your thoughts when it comes to management of relationships? So in some fields we call it CRM, in some spaces it's just relationship management. But what does that prospect relationship management look like for you and your teams today? And is there anything that you wish you did, that you do now, that you wish you did when you started all those years ago? Like maybe it's like you get your prospects on a newsletter. So I do that with some prospects. I have like a newsletter that goes out every 2 months that lets people know what's going on in their business. So they might not buy from us now, but they feel like they're in something private, and it sparks lunch conversations and requests every so often. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything that you guys do that people can take notes and kind of implement.
I think it depends on the size of the deal, right? When it's like tens of millions, you know that this is like, you know, multiple levels of relationship. You need guys at the very top, you know, talking into the board. You need guys that are talking to the key decision makers. You need guys that are talking to the influencers in their language. So for example, you know, if I was selling a deal and I needed to, you know, the CMO was a large, you know, influencer in the deal, I'd bring in someone like Dave, right? Because he speaks the same language, right? I'd make sure that the CEO was speaking to the guy at the board. You know, me, I'll deal with the guys that are making the decision as such, right? So, you know, you want to be able to have some options. You can't do it all yourself, because it closes off some doors that, you know, if you mess up on one, let's say at the board level, you messed up all the way through now, right? Whereas if you've got few people doing it, you can say, well, look, hold on a second, let me sort that issue out. You know, what he said was not quite right. This is not the way that we're doing this, blah, blah, blah. So, you know what I mean? You can play good cop, bad cop as well on it. And that gives you a bit more flexibility on the really big deals. But obviously, if these are smaller companies that you're dealing with, you're going to have to do a lot more yourself. But what I would say is, you know, I'm terrible at kind of making notes, but I've learned now that, you know, keeping track of conversations is absolutely key in managing that relationship. Because if you've got 3-4 clients on the go, you know, it's so difficult to remember how, you know, what you promised, what you'd said, etc. You know, no doubt that they will always remember everything.
Yeah, I love that.
Yep. I mean, I think, you know, the tools like Pipedrive, which we've talked about before, are really good in terms of making sure that you've got a kind of diary of sort of follow-ups and things. So, I mean, I loved your idea of the newsletter. So things like that, I think, are really, really good, just to kind of keep your name visible with these prospects. I think if you've had conversations with people, then often they're very happy to kind of be kept up to date. I mean, when I talk to prospects, I always say, oh, would you mind if I back in touch in a month or two's time? And, you know, very rarely do people say no, just never get back to me. Do things like take people out for lunch a lot, you know, just have friendly chats, invite them to events and things like that, just to kind of keep them ticking over. I think, you know, one of the things I was going to say, I'm going from sort of 5 to 6 figures, and, you know, Dharmesh has kind of alluded to this. is you need to really think about that. You know, if you've got larger deal sizes, you need to think about the management of those. So, you know, on the agency side, that means probably having dedicated account people to help look after an account of that size. And then, you know, getting those account people targeted on sort of managing that deal, but then also looking at kind of future deals as well. So businesses are built on momentum as well. So just because you land a 6-figure deal doesn't mean that that's the end goal. The next goal should be to get the next 6-figure deal, you know, or even talk about a 7-figure deal, you know. So you need to think about momentum in all of these things. Like, I think the classic mistake businesses often make, or people in businesses make, is like they think achieving something is the end goal, and you know, you never achieve the end goal in a business. It's always about kind of going on to the next thing. I mean, I talk about, it's like climbing a mountain, but you never quite reach the top. And that's almost, I think it's sort of one of the best things about business, is like every turn is a new adventure. But you know, I think sort of really thinking about kind of management, so that's a great question actually, BJ, because I think, you know, in the past I've tried to do too much myself and then missed opportunities, because like Dharmesh should say, you're spinning plates so much that you don't see something coming in, and you know, that's just a missed opportunity. So
I'd also add that, you know, sometimes you don't have to win the project to win a deal, right?
Right.
And you know, one of the things that we did with a bank in Holland was that, you know, we pitched for a big deal, and we hired this enterprise sales lady, tons of experience in selling, you know, 7-figure deals, right? And we lost a deal, right? And about a month later, I went back in to find out, you know, why we lost the deal. She'd actually decided that we were too small a company to sell these kind of deals anyway, right? And left. So I went back in and said, you know, what was the deal? And they said, well, you know, this is a really big project. It's quite important, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you know, what's your challenge now, right? So, well, the problem is that we've got a timescale like this, and the project is like this. And I said, well, you know, why don't you just take a temporary solution from us? Because we can get you live in 3 months, right? Which is, you know, within your timescales, but you're never going to deliver the big project in 3 months. You know that, right? So why don't you just take this as a contingency? You can throw it away afterwards, because, you know, for a 3-month thing, it's going to cost you 50 grand, right? And I pulled the figure out the top of my head. I said, really? Came back, and, you know, within the week, we'd signed a deal, right? And this project, our deal was for a 6-month license to use our software. And sure enough, the big project was late by another 6 months. So we signed again for another 50K. And at the end of the year, they were still late on the big project. So we signed again. And at that point, they said, well, look, can we just take a longer deal, right? And so this thing went from a 50K thing to over $250,000, right? But what we had done was continuously deliver on that deal. And, you know, over 3 years, that became £5 million worth of business, right? And, you know, what it says to me is that, you know, sometimes it's better to take something small and prove yourself, and then bigger things will happen. And that's where, you know, what Dave is saying on account management, that's exactly what happened. You know, I just spent as much time with as many people in the bank as possible, and just telling them what I was doing in the small project. Oh, we've got something like that. You know, something drops out of conversations. Great way to do it, rather than, you know, some guy that rings up and says, oh, do you need one of these, right?
Yeah, for sure. So to round up, obviously we could talk about this for a long time. I think a part of sales is loneliness and building resilience with those no's. Can we speak a little bit about that? Just any sound bit of advice or thoughts that you guys can give to anyone listening, playing this back, when it comes to resilience, battle in your mind that you go through when dealing with people you're selling to?
It's a really good question, because it can get very frustrating. And I like, you use the word loneliness, and I think sometimes you end up going, you know, am I pushing water up a hill? And I just think, you know, if you believe in what you're selling, and you have people who, kind of responding positively, but maybe not buying, then you know you're onto something. So it's just a case of keep going and just being sort of relentless about that. I think it's you know, and I think sometimes you got to change the story slightly. So don't be flexible, have a flexible mindset around these things. But you know, it's tough. I mean, there is nothing easy about running a business, to be honest with you. And that's the good and the bad thing. I mean, it's a constant evolution in terms of the way you're kind of looking at the world. But you know, it's sort of hard work really in this sort of stuff really pays off.
Yeah. And yourself,
Yeah,
Daniel?
I'd you know, echo that and say also that you know, it's not just the no's, but you know, it is soul destroying if you spent a whole day calling and trying to speak to clients and you never get through. So, but you know, it's not a failure. It's just, you know, the only failure is not trying. That's the main thing.
Yeah,
Just keep at
agree.
it. Keep at
I
it, and
agree.
you know, if you stop, that's your failure, right? Not the fact that you're, you know, contacting these people. And then the other key thing is that, you know, if you get any small successes, celebrate those, because
Yeah,
you know, you need to remember the moments when you actually got through to somebody, spoke to the CEO, and he said, yes, I understand what you solve. Whether he buys it or not, you know, if there's affirmation about what you're doing, take it as a win, right? And those things will get you through a lot of the other no's that you might incur along the way. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Well, thank you both for sharing so many tips, so many pieces of advice. To close off to everyone, something I always say to the entrepreneurs that we work with is everything starts with small action. You know, do something today, take something practical from today and implement in your business rather than trying to implement the whole hour worth of information. Try to take one thing daily for the next 7 days and see the difference in your end of Q4. I hope everyone stays safe and has a great night. Thank you again to both my esteemed guests who in 3 years got to 14 million and then went on and did other things. And you both kind of told it as it is, you know, business, there's highs and lows, right? But the skill of managing relationships is something that you keep with you for life. So
well,
thank you.
I think it's, you know, the thing I will say is when you do get that win, I think there's no better feeling than that. And that's something, you know, the hard work just pays off. I mean, and just as Dharm says, it's like celebrate those wins, to be honest with you. So anyway, thank you so much for having us.
All right, guys. Bless
Thank
up.
you.
Cheerio.